Hello, everyone. This is Sean Smith, and you are tuned in to the Country Fried Outdoors Chasing Your Experience podcast. The podcast that will connect you to resources regionally and nationwide to engage them and you in open, honest discussions so that we can inspire the growth that you need to chase the experience you want. So strap yourself in because here we go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Country Fried Outdoors Chasing Your Experience podcast. I'm your host, Sean Smith, and I know I say this almost every episode, but I mean it this time. We have a very special episode for all of our listeners out there. On the other line, I have the Deer Program Administrator for the Ohio Division of Wildlife, Dr. Mike Tonkovich. Sir, how are you doing?
Well, we can drop the sir, and you and the doctor. I was asked the other day, I was visiting with an attorney, which is always uncomfortable, and he asked me my name, and I said Mike, and he said, well, it looks like Michael, and I said, well, if you want to be official, it's Tonk, because most days I don't respond to anything but Tonk, except for my wife. It's Michael when she wants to get my attention. So I'm doing very well, and happy to be here today. As we were discussing before we came on, I can talk deer all the time. Hopefully folks are interested in hearing what I have to say.
Well, I hope they are as well. So I got to ask, as the Deer Program Administrator for the Division of Wildlife, what do you do?
Well, there's a variety of things. Let me think about it. A typical day is right now. It used to be a one-man show up until 2013. The Deer Program was essentially myself. And then I want to be clear on that, though. I relied very, very heavily on a lot of our staff to carry out many of the things that the Deer Program does, like collect annual age, sex, and condition data at our aging stations, collect CWD surveillance data, collect hemorrhagic disease samples for submission to the Department of Ag. But in 2013, we hired Clint McCoy, and we affectionately refer to him as our deer biologist, or Captain Clint, as Jerry Kripp often refers to him. So Clint, when he came on, we divvied things up a little bit, and he handles a lot of the day-to-day data analysis, the GIS stuff. The stuff that you would figure most young folks would be very comfortable with, GIS and apps and crunching numbers, although I did that for many years. So I was happy to turn that over and shifted my focus largely to, I suppose just more administrative stuff, more budget stuff, big picture things, serve as the state's expert if an expert is needed on deer management issues or deer research issues or deer biology issues. But the bulk of it, since even before we found CWD in Wyandotte County in 2020, a lot of my work when Clint came on was shifted over to the disease side of things. We have two, even before CWD showed up, as I said, I was spending a lot of time learning what was going on around the Midwest in particular, but of course around the country, keeping up on things, what research was going on, what we knew, what we didn't know about CWD, and of course trying to get ready for its inevitable presence here in Ohio. And then hemorrhagic disease, we deal with that annually now. So managing that, collecting samples, and as I said, getting those sent off to the Department of Ag. Preparing harvest regulations. Clint and I work closely on that. What are we going to do for the upcoming season? So we analyze the harvest data. We both, he prepares a good chunk of it. I provide feedback, answering emails, doing podcasts, doing interviews, giving talks, lecturing in classes. Students at OSU and OU typically will hear from Clint and I at least once a year. So just a variety of things. Attend banquets, which is a big part of this year. Attend professional meetings. The list goes on and on.
So in other words, you're saying you're a very busy guy who has an extensive knowledge about Ohio's deer population. Is that a good summary?
Well, expensive might be an overstatement.
Okay.
But I will say, yeah, certainly busy. And it does vary, sort of like the tax guy. You know, there's a tax season, and this is typically it. It's interesting because most folks think that we're super busy during the deer season, but that's actually the end of the deer season. Things start to ramp up, but typically the deer season is kind of quiet for us. We're just the calm before the storm. So, but we do get busy as the season comes to an end. We prepare data that will be used to formulate harvest regulations for the upcoming season, and so that keeps us kind of busy. And then we'll do postseason surveys, and again, as I said, this is a busy time of year for banquets and meetings and whatnot.
Yeah. So let's dive into some of these topics you brought up, some of your responsibilities with the Division of Wildlife. And one of those responsibilities is I think, I don't know if a lot of people understand where our harvest numbers come, not our numbers, but how you guys budget for what the harvest rate is going to be, not the rate, but how many deer a hunter could harvest in a locale. Because we've done some changes over the years. Because when I first started hunting, back in the 90s, we were zoned out, if I remember correctly. And there was like a zone, a B zone, a C zone, and then I think a D that was like all of our big city areas might have been like the D zone. And then and you can tell me when this happened, but there was a year you guys switched from zones to county bag limits. And I know I'm gonna touch on a lot of things on this very broad spectrum before I hand it back over to you. But we switched to county, and then each county got their own bag limits. And then we also, if I'm correct, we actually reduced what the state bag limit was. Is that a fair statement there? And I guess I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, that's pretty good memory. You did a great job summarizing the last 2 decades. So yeah, that's pretty accurate. And if you'd like, I can dive in. The first thing I'll mention, though, Sean, is that the zones were they were extremely artificial because they were just collections of counties, and it was largely a simplification to help hunters understand regulations, to make it easier, right? I mean, that's part of the job. I mean, that's a big part of the job is let's figure out what we need to accomplish in the easiest way to do it, right? The simplest way that we can get it done. And occasionally we make some compromises, right? And that's what those zones represent. I think I'll back up a little bit and say, I think what you're getting at is when I've talked to folks over the years, people have no idea that there's actually some science or some method to our madness here, that they thought it was, there's a person that does this. And so I always got a kick out of that. Yeah, it's just not, it's just not free form. We don't just throw darts at a dartboard to see what we should do in this county, or we don't wake up every day figuring out how we can make life miserable for Ohio's hunters. In fact, it's just the opposite. But yes, so the zones were just collections of counties, and I started in 1995, so I'm in year 30 right now, and I think I just completed 30 years of state service. So from the get-go, I pushed us to move away from these zones because they were, as I said, they were wholly artificial. There would be occasions where you might have a county that needed to be in a 3-deer bag, but it was in an island of 2-deer counties, or a county may have needed to be in a 1-deer bag, but it was in an island of 2-deer counties. So to keep things simple, we just made a zone. And unfortunately, that county that really needed to be, for instance, we'll pick Fayette County. That's the county that always comes to mind. That's my poster child for counties that really needed protection. What we would find ourselves doing is we would simply, again, for the ease of the digest and keeping things clean, we would put a county in a zone that it really didn't need to be in. In other words, if in that case where I just described a 1 inside of an island of 2s, we would make Fayette 2, and just because it would keep things simple. But what would that would lead to potentially overharvest. And then the other way around, you'd have a county where you might, it would be easier to keep it at 2 instead of going to 3. And of course, that would lead to underharvest in those particular situations. So the thing that folks have to remember when they think about deer management is that we've got such a heterogeneous landscape out there. You think of a county, that looks relatively similar from an airplane, and you might think about Benton County because it's roughly 75-80% forested, and you think, well, one regulation for the entire county would work well, but then you go to a county like Holmes County, and you start looking at the landscape, and you're looking at deer habitat across the landscape, and you very quickly realize that county probably should be managed by three separate sets of regulations. In a perfect world, that's what you would have. And we explored back in 2018. We put a group of folks together. We explored dividing this, getting rid of, even taking those zones even further. Just collapsing those zone boundaries and going to counties. And then the next step, the more logical thing to do, because those are just political boundaries. Sean, you recognize counties are nothing more than political boundaries. They don't represent habitat necessarily.
Correct.
Would be to create collections of counties or parts of counties, divide Holmes County, for instance, up into three parts and combine it with like areas of the state. Obviously they would have to be, adjacent to. We explored that idea. We had great support for it. The administration just was not fond of it. I guess they felt like it was too big of a change, too much of a change for hunters to swallow. So we moved on. But yes, there is a method to our madness, and the harvest data that we collect is just part of the equation when it comes to setting harvest regulations for the upcoming season. We will look at things. In fact, the backbone is a survey that we conduct every 3 to 5 years, where we reach out to our production landowners, that is our farmers. This is a statewide survey. We will reach and hear from 4,000 to 6,000 farmers and 6,000 hunters, give or take a bit. Again, this is only done every 3 to 5 years because it's a fairly significant outlay of money to do these surveys. Last time we did it was the summer of 2023, and I think we had something on the order of $150,000 invested in those two surveys. We get lots of information from those two surveys, but the most important question that we asked our farmers and our hunters is this. In the case of farmers, too many, too few, or just about the right number of deer where you farm. In the case of hunters, too few, too many, just about the right number of deer where you hunt. And we get that information, let's just call it, we'll keep things simple, we get it from each of our counties, right? And we compare those numbers. So what we're hoping, and this may sound a little strange, but what we're doing is trying to have equal numbers of folks dissatisfied with us at the same time. And I know that's silly, but that's the actual truth. And I'll explain a little bit more here. So let's just take the state. We'll step things up to the statewide level. 2015, when we ran the survey, what we found was that 50% of our farmers said there were too many deer. Okay, so that's 50% of our farmers were dissatisfied. Okay, but we also found, and I'm rounding here a little bit, we also found at the same time that let me back that up. I got my numbers reversed. We had 29% of our farmers were dissatisfied. They said there's too many deer. Okay, we had twice as many hunters that said there are too few deer where I hunt. So 50% of our hunters were dissatisfied. We'll call it 25. We'll just keep things simple. 25% of our farmers were dissatisfied. So our goal was to increase the deer population. And by doing that, what you thinking ahead, what would happen the next time when we run the survey, which happened to be 2023, if we tighten down on the regulations, we allow hunters to harvest fewer deer, we're going to grow the deer population. Come back and we survey three years later, and we find that, oh, lo and behold, we went from 50% of our hunters being dissatisfied down to 35%, which is a step in the right direction, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, what we saw is instead of 25% of our farmers being dissatisfied, saying there are too many deer, we now are at 35. So what we've done is basically close that gap between the dissatisfied farmers and dissatisfied hunters. So that's kind of what drives us. When we get up every morning, if you will, the sign above our door is that those surveys, those goal-setting surveys that provide management direction for us. Now, step off the beaten path for just a sec And let's talk about how things like hemorrhagic disease outbreak in Northwest Ohio this year affects that. Okay. We lost a lot of deer in Northwest Ohio this year, and we had to respond to that. Okay. In spite of what the goals were there. And I will say that in that part of the state, our marching orders from those surveys were, we need to reduce deer populations. Okay. We had a lot more dissatisfied farmers than we had dissatisfied hunters. So the goal was to reduce deer populations. Now, in response to a hemorrhagic disease outbreak where we lose a lot of deer, like we felt we lost, not only that was in Northwest Ohio this year, but take 2017, Jefferson County, Ohio, closer to your neck of the woods there in Tuscarawas County, I think is where you said you were from.
That's correct.
We lost a lot of deer in Jefferson County in 2017. So we adjusted the bag limits downward to encourage some herd growth as we proposed for the 25 season in Northwest Ohio this year. So we'll make annual tweaks to the harvest regulations, i.e., the bag limits that you see in each of the counties, based on things like this. We may have extremely poor weather, for instance, and so hunters couldn't get out. Rewind to 2000 and 2007, 2.5 inches, 3 inches of rain on opening day of deer season, right? So that was the key. That was the gun season opening day. So that was the key harvest day. So we may see. We saw the harvest drop off significantly. It was down 51% opening day. By the end of the season, it was down 11%. So in response to that, if we don't recover, we might adjust the bag limit to increase the harvest the following year. So that's kind of deer management 101 in a nutshell. You start out with where are you and where you need to be, and then you look in the toolbox, i.e. the harvest regulations, to see what you have available to help you get there.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. And I know it sounds silly, like you look at who's just, what group is dissatisfied, but you kind of got to play that game a little bit, especially in the government realm. You got to play that game because that is, where a lot of our support comes from.
Yeah, we live in an agricultural state, and we're reminded of that. And yeah, we had not only. And I guess, Sean, not to interrupt you, but you hit the nail on the head. And I would say that, the other thing, of course, that we have to consider, and this is we are the struggle with deer management, not only in Ohio, but across the region, is how do you capture, I guess to the untrained ear, folks that may be listening in and saying, well, wait a second, what about the motorists? What about the homeowners? What about concerns with Lyme disease and other tick-borne illnesses? How are you factoring that into the equation? Do you address any other constituency other than farmers and hunters? And my answer to those folks is specifically no. We do not survey the general citizenry, but I'm quick to point out nearly every one of those hunters is probably driving, so they're a motorist. So they're factoring in. We've got that component. Many of them like to garden. Many of them, we know from surveys, are affected by tick-borne diseases, Lyme diseases, and the same applies to our farmers as well. So I think that those two very, very large groups of constituents really provide a pretty broad brush picture to what's going on in the state. They don't capture everything, but they certainly do capture a good chunk of folks.
So you kind of touched on this. I got to bring it up because this is like one of those urban legends that is circles around the deer hunters out in the state, is that you guys, when I say you guys, the Division of Wildlife, part of your decision making is because of the insurance companies coming after you because of the motor vehicle crashes with deer. So what I heard you say was that no, it's the farmers and the hunters that we're listening to. Is that correct? Or
yeah, that's spot on. And yes, I've heard that for 30 years, and I've never once received even so much as a coupon for a dozen donuts at Dunkin's for adjusting harvest regulations. And I say that, of course, jokingly. I guess my immediate response, Sean, to those folks is check your premiums. If we were responsive to the insurance industry, I'm guessing that your premiums would not be going up with the size of the deer population. I think if you thought about it long enough, you'd make that connection. Like, yeah, I guess they'll just charge us more, if there are more deer collisions. But I do want to address something before we move on. One of the things that you asked me very astutely noted that we had changed the statewide bag limit from 18 to 6, and that's something that I think is really important for us to talk about, because it really highlights the social side of this job. That perception is our reality. That adjustment had nothing to do with biology, had nothing to do with harvest. It simply had everything to do with was sending a message that we were potentially going to overharvest our deer, that deer were being overexploited, that deer were being undervalued because you let folks take up to 18 deer. The average successful hunter, Sean, in the state of Ohio takes 1.3 deer. Moving the bag limit to 18 is no different than a 3 deer bag limit for all intents and purposes. There are probably 2 or 3 families in the state that, I'm saying this knowing that there are a couple that work for our agency that might kill 18 deer. But by and large, 75% of our hunters will kill a single deer. And then at the end of the day, the average hunter is taking 1.3 deer. So we made that change, not because we were killing, we were over harvesting deer, but because the administration felt like it may have been poorly received. And on the other hand, so that's I guess I'll stop there.
No, so you kind of stole my thunder a little bit, because that was the next thing I was going to hit on, because you brought up the 18, and now we went down to 6. But what I don't think what most hunters or most people understand is what the demographic of, or let me say, what the actual harvest rate per hunter is in the state. And you guys, I went back at least, the last summer you guys had, which was back in 15. So we're going close to 10 years of data that's posted on your guys' website, which, by the way, you guys do an amazing job of collecting data and presenting it if someone just takes the time to read over it. And I'm kind of new getting into it. I wish I'd have started years ago. So kudos to you guys for that. But you touched on this. Only, like you said, only 75% of the hunters in the state, period, 1 deer. That's all they harvest, 75%. And there's only about 1% that harvest more than 3 deer.
Yep.
And that's a pretty good average over the last 10 years. Now that fluctuates very, very slightly. So really the reduction, as you said, the reduction from 18 to 6 really isn't affecting the quantitative number, but it's kind of given more of a, hey, we, like you said, and I'm just paraphrasing, that it gives a better perception that we do care about the deer herd and we're not trying to eradicate them, which that makes sense. And and to be honest with you, I never knew it was 18. Even when I knew it was zones, because I was younger, I'm like, for my mind, in my zone, once I was done in my zone, I was done. I was talking to a wildlife officer here in Tuscarawas County, and he's like, you do know it used to be 18. I'm like, really? I never knew that. But of course, I was young and dumb at that time too. So
well, and I think it was like 2012. I don't remember the years; they sort of all run together now. But I actually reached out to my colleagues in Wisconsin, and for all intents and purposes, John, that year, and I think to this day, there's probably an unlimited number of deer that you can harvest in Wisconsin. So you're comparing an unlimited bag, or I guess that doesn't even make any sense, but unlimited harvest opportunity in Wisconsin to a state like ours with an 18 deer bag limit. And when you broke down, the numbers of hunters that took 1, 2, 3, and 4 identical mirror images of each other, and they harvest the same as Ohioans, on average 1.3, 1.4 deer. So the bag limit is largely irrelevant. Once you get above 2 deer, the bag limit becomes irrelevant for all intents and purposes.
All right, that's a pretty good summation of that. And a lot of that just comes to the hunters themselves and what their actual goals are for the year, or what their time allotment is. Because We're going to touch on this again once we start getting into some other conversations about the demographic of the deer herd here later. But so one of the biggest challenge, I mean, I think one of the challenges for you guys obviously is going to be keeping up with the disease trends and stuff. And obviously, EHD seems to be more of an annual thing for us now. But the other one is the introduction to CWD, which seems to be the big buzzword out of all everyone since its realization or its discovery in Colorado, back in the 70s, and that it spread throughout the entire United States. So let's talk about some of the challenges that those diseases play upon your guys' decision making, but also just our deer herd in general.
Yeah. Well, I think CWD is it's wearing people out. It's wearing agencies out. It's wearing biologists out. We could spend hours talking about the intricacies of that disease. The challenge with the reason why it's so difficult compared to hemorrhagic disease, for instance, and I apologize in advance for all of the acronyms, but if I say HD, I'm talking about hemorrhagic disease. CWD, of course, chronic wasting disease. Hemorrhagic disease is so much easier because it's so visible. It's in your face. It's in your nose. You can see it, right? You can count dead deer. You can see them in the streams. You can see them alongside of on the banks of the river, right in your pond. CWD is a silent killer, and it takes a lot longer, and that's really difficult for people. I think, this again is everything we do in this business is really, I remember, good grief, and any students of wildlife management will remember their professors early on in their undergraduate days telling them, if all we had to deal with were the animals, life would be easy. And of course, that is so true, especially with deer. But that's okay. I'm not complaining. In fact, this is a great job. It's been a great job. I get to work with lots of people, and I'm fascinated by the social challenges. I often joke telling folks I should have got instead of a PhD and master's and PhD in fisheries and wildlife sciences from Virginia Tech, I'd have been better served with an economics degree, a sociology degree, psychology, anthropology, just that whole suite of ologies, because that's what we're dealing with. So hemorrhagic disease is it actually makes CWD very, very difficult, as if it's not difficult enough, because people will constantly remind us that we've got more dead deer from hemorrhagic disease than will ever die from CWD, and of course that's not the case. But in a year, yes, absolutely, positively, and especially if it's a bad year for hemorrhagic disease, you could lose several hundred deer, maybe thousands of deer, right? And those are in your face. You see it happening. CWD, on the other hand, of course, it's such a difficult disease because everything that could be difficult about a disease, it has it. It's got a long incubation period, which means the deer are going to go perhaps as long as 18 months, up to 2 years before they start showing clinical signs of illness. But the problem is they're shedding prions all the while. Of course, and prions, for those that may not know, that's the infectious agent. It's nothing but a rogue protein. It's not a virus. It's not a bacteria. There's no vaccine. There's no way to treat these deer. They look like normal deer until they don't look like normal deer. They die, but you don't see them die. And it takes a long time before you start to see population level impacts. We talked about Jefferson County. We talked about, the Northwest Ohio counties this year. We can talk about Southwest or Southeast Ohio 2 years ago. Populations were impacted right then and there. You saw it, right? And so we responded to it, right? But with CWD, we can look to states like Illinois and Wisconsin and Arkansas. It's taken a couple decades before we see signs, and it took a 5-year project and several $1 million in Wisconsin to figure out that once prevalence reaches roughly 29% in adult females, CWD is going to replace much of your antlerless harvest. You're going to start to see population level declines. The work began on population level impacts in western states, and largely on mule deer, some on whitetail deer. But it wasn't until this year that we finally had a glimpse at what's going on in our more productive eastern whitetail deer herds, and the stories are the same. We're going to see population level impacts, and it's going to take time. It took almost 2 decades in some cases, and you look at the core area of Wisconsin where they conducted this research. Iowa and Dane counties. It's been around since 2001, 2000. So we've got 2 decades. It took before we got to the point where you take Iowa County, for instance, in Wisconsin, they're actually seeing a significant reduction in harvest, and it's due to 2 factors. And I want to be clear on this. It's due to 2 factors. First factor is CWD is killing deer, right? But the second factor is hunters have decided that they're tired of shooting positive deer, so they're not hunting there anymore. So the harvest is going down. So there's 2 things going on. And so thankfully, our colleagues in Wisconsin and our colleagues in Arkansas now have some solid data, and the data will continue to come in. The work in Arkansas continues. I think that the project in Wisconsin is largely wrapped up. They're still working on publications there. But the point is, Sean, is that you can't see, touch, feel, taste CWD, but it's going to have a far greater impact on deer populations than hemorrhagic disease ever will in the state of Ohio. But people, and the hunters are just like the rest of us. You take off our hunter cap and you put back on your regular cap. We don't really think long term. CWD is often been compared to climate change, right? I don't see it. When I can't walk out of the house without getting scalded, then I'll believe it, right? But until I see it, it's just not. And it's normal. That's human behavior. I'm not slighting our hunters. I'm not slighting our administrators. That's normal human behavior. We don't tend to react until we absolutely, positively have to. But I'm telling you, with CWD, it's coming. There was an article in a newspaper. It's here, obviously, but its impacts are coming. There was a retired wildlife officer wrote a nice article, one of our Ohio newspapers, and one of the comments that he made was, thankfully, our numbers aren't where Wisconsin's are. So I, of course, had to very politely point out to him that we will be there because Wisconsin and Illinois and Minnesota and others have been very, very aggressive at removing additional deer above and beyond harvest. They've been doing lots of culling, lots of targeted removals to keep prevalence rate low. We did a little bit of that first couple of years that CWD showed up in Northwest Ohio, but we since backed off. Our populations are strong, and they're getting stronger every single year there, right? So people are like, well, how bad can CWD be? Well, it takes time. Time will tell. I will long be retired when the impacts of CWD are going to be felt, but it's going to come unless there's some dramatic major shift and we get disease resilient deer somehow on this landscape. But I think that's the struggle with CWD is that it's not something that most folks want to deal with or can see. And I can't emphasize this enough. I so appreciate it, but we need people to think forward. We need people to see that their grandkids and their kids, in some cases, are going to be impacted by CWD here in Ohio and across most of the whitetails range, because it's going to burn through the population. We don't know for sure, and there's what it might mean is that, for instance, in Wisconsin, rather than hunting a buck every year, you may have to put in for a drawing to hunt every 3rd year. We don't know what kind of impact it's going to have, but it's having an impact on populations. And we know for a fact populations begin to shrink when CWD prevalence reaches a certain percent. Now, those are 29% in Wisconsin, right? Where we are in Ohio, even in our probably our most disease abundant area, disease rich area of the state, we're probably still at 2%. So yes, we are. We can be thankful for where we are right now, but it's just a natural progression. I mean, we can expect this. There's nothing unique about Ohio that's going to say, oh, it'll reach 3% and stabilize. No. It will continue to grow in those areas where it's at, and it will continue to spread.
So let me follow up a question on this. And if you know the answer, do you know how long it took Wisconsin from their discovery of CWD to their prevalence rate to be in 29%? And I know there's a lot of variables, and that might be an unfair question to ask because just so everyone's clear, there's a lot of variables that's going to go into that. So just because they seen it in, let's say 5 years, and that's totally like way faster, probably what it was. But let's say it was 5 years. There's a lot of variables that are put in place or that are in place that was specific to Wisconsin. It doesn't necessarily mean that's going to translate 100% to Ohio's population. But do you know kind of what the time frame of that was?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually pretty clear. I mean, CWD was found in I think it was Dane County, Wisconsin, 2001. I think they discovered it. I think with modeling, Sean, they figured out that it was probably there for a few years before they found their first positive. Mm-hmm. So it's been around. It's been around for 2 decades. Wisconsin has a ton of deer. They always have, right? But they did some great things in the early to mid 1990s, late 1990s with Ernebuck and different programs. And again, when they discovered CWD, we've got a really there's really neat, and of course viewers can't see this stuff, but we had 2 states side by side because it wasn't but a year later, I think Illinois discovered it. Okay. Illinois and Wisconsin start out the race together. Okay. For 4 years or so, Wisconsin and Illinois were doing the same thing. They were aggressively harvesting and removing deer, giving additional opportunities to hunters, sharpshooting deer, whatever it took. They were both doing the same thing, very aggressive, very similar sized deer populations. And Wisconsin backed off because of pressure. Illinois kept on, and they have kept on. Okay. It wasn't until a few years ago the prevalence in the state of Illinois started rising above, the single digit percentages, right? So the reality is you nailed it, right? There's a ton of things that come into play here. But the 2 most important things are, probably the most important thing is deer density. I don't know exactly where their deer densities were when they started. I don't know for sure. I mean, I'm sure I could find out, but I would venture to say that we probably have very comparable deer densities. Midwestern states generally, obviously if we're comparing very similar landscapes, right? We can't compare a Forest County in Ohio with a completely ag-dominated landscape in Wisconsin. But generally speaking, across the Midwest, deer densities would be very comparable. And so that's the one common denominator that we have to be mindful of, is that this is a disease of deer. Okay, I'll keep it really simple. It's a disease of deer. Obviously, it's a disease of elk and moose as well. But for the sake of this discussion, this is a disease of deer. Okay, in very simple terms, fewer deer, less disease. More deer, more disease. Because this, you can't have a disease maintain itself in a population if you don't have deer to maintain it, right? So that's why deer density is such a relevant part of this conversation. And then very quickly, folks will say, well, we're not seeing any impacts. I've never seen a dead deer. I've never even seen a sick deer. Well, I get it. You haven't, but it's slow. I hate to draw in the medical stuff, but my wife's a nurse practitioner. It's like prostate cancer. Many of us males will die with it. It won't kill us, but we'll die with it. It's a very slow growing cancer, thankfully. Others, unfortunately, are not. But that's kind of the idea behind CWD is it's just a slow crawl. It's just creeping, and then it gets to a point where it really takes off. You've heard the term exponential growth. That's what's going to happen eventually. Is once prevalence reaches a certain level, and that's the other very criminal thing, if you will, about this disease is it doesn't take animal to animal contact. That would be great if it was just animal to animal contact, but it doesn't. Deer can pick this up indirectly from their environment. So once an environment is contaminated, and we know for sure that prions can remain infective for up to 3 years, perhaps even longer than that. So once an environment becomes contaminated with lots of deer and lots of prions, reducing deer populations is kind of a moot point, because once you bring them back, there's a good chance that the prions will still be available mm-hmm. to infect deer. So it's a tough one. It's
almost damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation. So one of my listeners or follows me on Instagram asked, and I guess we'll segue into this, and then we'll get ready to move on to the next topic. But what will it take for Ohio to become a full-on CWD testing state? Because I know we have some areas.
What does that mean?
So let's say it's mandatory. It's mandatory CDW testing.
That's unrealistic because of the cost. And so what we don't really need to do that. And I will say this. Okay, so let's back up. So surveillance. There's two things you got to think about when you think about CWD and collecting samples and testing deer. Right? We design each year. We design a statistically based, scientifically based sampling protocol that will allow us to detect the disease with some level of confidence once it reaches a certain level. And that certain level is typically 1%. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we can be 95% sure that we're going to find it when it reaches 1%. Okay. So we don't have to test every single deer. Let's be clear on that. There's no reason why we have to test every deer. And I think that's just sampling theory. Anybody that does any kind of surveying or sampling understands that it is not necessary to test every single deer in the state of Ohio. That said, Sean, if a hunter in the state of Ohio has concerns about CWD and wants his or her deer tested, absolutely, positively, we're going to find a way to get them tested, right? Whether it's through the self-serve kiosks that we have distributed in the state, whether you have to make an effort to go to one of our district offices or one of our work units. If all else fails, you can get your deer to the Ohio Department of Agriculture and they can perform the test for you. So we are here to make sure that hunters have confidence in the deer that they're harvesting are disease-free. If that's a concern of theirs, we're going to test it for them. We don't need to test every single deer that's harvested in the state of Ohio. What we need to do is we need to focus on those areas that are most likely to be positive. And of course, the obvious answer there is those areas adjacent to known CWD positive townships or counties. So that's why you continue to see this expansion of our disease surveillance area. Ideally, I will say this: I would like to see hunters more engaged in the voluntary testing around our disease surveillance areas. For instance, what we do, you're familiar with the DSA. Let's just talk about the way that it sits right now, without Crawford County being in there. For instance, that one comes to mind immediately. That's sort of my go-to example, but. So what we feel like, because it's right on the edge of Wyandotte and Crawford County, right on that line, we would really like hunters in Crawford County, at least those townships that butt up against Wyandotte County, to have their deer voluntarily tested. So in order to get a hold of those folks, we will take everyone. What we past summer is everyone that killed a deer in Wyandotte County in the Crawford County, in 23 season. We would reach out to them. And with an email over the summer and say, hey, listen, we noticed that you killed a deer in Crawford County. If you kill a deer this fall, we'd love for you to get your deer tested if it's in one of these three townships. Okay, that's first line of defense. Second thing that we do is when a hunter kills a deer in Crawford County during the 24 season, we reach out, they will get a notification saying, hey, we noticed that you killed a deer in Crawford County. If it's in one of these three townships, we'd really like for you to get your deer tested for free at no cost. And we're going to make it easy for you. We've got all of these self-serve kiosks within driving, a short driving distance from where you live. Sadly, there aren't many takers. There aren't many takers on those kinds of things. So I would encourage folks to. Those are the areas that we expect the disease to be next. And if you don't want to risk eating, if the risk of eating a positive deer is a concern of yours, help us with that and get your deer tested, because I think what folks need to know, Sean, is that we know where CWD is. We've documented that there could be CWD could theoretically. Our surveillance tells us otherwise. But my point is that it could be anywhere in the state of Ohio. Just because we've not found it doesn't mean it's not there, right? So that's the message I'm trying to deliver, folks. Is that it's not in Crawford County. Well, maybe it is. We just haven't been able to collect enough samples to tell us with complete certainty, or near certainty, I should say, that it's not there. So those are the areas where I've strongly encouraged folks to get engaged and get involved. And I want to make one final plug. Anybody that wants their deer tested, reach out to us, and we'll make sure that we get your deer tested for you.
It sounds like you make it easy enough to get it done, and I agree.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Like, it's going to have to. I mean, obviously, it's going to take somebody to volunteer their time, or to at least go to one of these kiosks or make the effort to get the deer tested, and it's for a good cause, obviously, because the more knowledge that we have, the better we can address the spread or at least the disease in the state. So maybe we can be one of the ones to be a model for the other states to help reduce whatever it is, reduce its impact. If maybe we're the ones that come up with the magic solution, if there ever is one. And I'm not saying there is, but in case, maybe we might be able to ones to do that. So, because there's been a lot of research into, or some research into it, a lot of states have already been affected by it and are way far more advanced into what we are. Maybe we might come up with one of the magic pills for it. And I say that, theoretically.
Yeah, and Sean, I gotta, if you have time, if we can talk just a couple more seconds about CWD,
yeah,
because you're saying some things that are really, really important for listeners to hear. It's CWD, in my opinion, where I sit now, and let's just I've been at this now for a decade, right? We haven't dealt with it in Ohio for a decade, but it's been on my radar. It's stuff that I eat, sleep, and drink most every single day now. CWD is frustrating because for me it's a distraction, in my opinion, from the real important issue that we really haven't even talked a ton about. We started the conversation at the top of the hour about deer management, but CWD, in my opinion, is a distraction. We're spending way too much time talking about this disease when really, if we address deer populations, we are going to address not only CWD, but we're also going to address a lot of the other things that are problematic with a very, very abundant deer population, which many states are dealing with. And if they're not right now, they can plan on it, because one of the other things that we have yet to talk about is hunter numbers, right? We've been very fortunate here in Ohio. We've been fairly flat the last few years, but prior to that, the decade before that, we lost 20% of our licensed hunters. And I expect this is just a calm before the storm, right? We're going to continue to see hunters leave the sport, and the problem with those that remain, and again, no slighting of hunters whatsoever, but those that remain are less inclined, less interested in harvesting antlerless deer, which means our populations are going to continue to explode, right? So CWD is really not, it's a giant deal, right? It is a big deal. And you said it, there's no silver bullet, but there is one that I guess I might go to bronze, right? Or maybe even some rough iron ore. There is a solution, and it's called deer management. It's called wise and responsible deer management. It's address your deer population, and you're going to address a lot of the CWD. Now, remember, because it doesn't require deer-to-deer interaction, and deer are wild creatures, thankfully, there's no way that we're ever going to stop CWD completely, because deer move, deer interact, they're social creatures, right? And hunters are killing deer in Arkansas and Kansas and other places, in West Virginia and Pennsylvania, and bringing those back to Ohio. And they're depositing them. Some of them are being dropped on the back 40, right? So there's things that we will never be able to control. But if we address deer populations, move off the subject of CWD for just a bit and address deer populations, problem's not solved, but it will give us time to figure out what we can do, in the meantime, whether or not that means going to a commercial venison market, whether it means, we have to, whether it means we just have to live with CWD. But the point is that that's the struggle that I have with CWD, is it's distracting us from the real conversation that needs to be had, and that's deer populations. And the problem is, this is the crux of the problem. First thing a state does when CWD shows up is, let's go in, blazing guns, let's reduce the deer population. Well, what happens is there are all of these other factors that allow CWD to continue to spread, right? So it looks like the deer reduction efforts were pointless. So all of a sudden you're like, well, there's no sense reducing deer populations. Oh, yes, there is. There's like 14 other reasons why we need to. So that I guess is where, I struggle with this issue of CWD, is that it's distracting us from the real issue at hand. I'm not saying we turn our backs or walk away. Yes, we need to continue to address CWD, and a lot of that is going to be education and talking about why we need to changed the way we manage deer, not only in Ohio, but across the Midwest and the Southeast and the New England states. Everyone is dealing with fewer hunters and a lot more deer.
Well, since you popped the lid off that topic, let's dive into it, because that is one of the big ones I wanted to get into, was the deer population demographic. Everything about the deer population that we can cover in the podcast with the time that we have together. I guess where do we start? Do we start with what is the state of our herd, and what is the number one thing that we as conservationists need to address?
We need to harvest additional deer. Our deer population is creeping up. So again, back to my history, started in 1995. I started on sort of the tail end, Sean, of the first effort to get on top of the deer population. And I can go back through the files and I can look at the outdoor writers from the late 1980s and the early 1990s saying, has Ohio lost control of their deer herd? We clearly demonstrated that we were able to manage Ohio's deer herd in the mid 1990s. We did it again in the mid 2000s. Again, that effort was precipitated by commentaries, wondering if we had lost the control of Ohio's deer herd, right? And we demonstrated that, oh no, we still have control of Ohio's deer herd. And interestingly enough, Ohio was rather unique in that time frame. We were able to increase antlerless, the proportion of the harvest that was antlerless deer. We were tops in the Midwest. I mean, hunters in Ohio grew up, they cut their teeth on antlerless deer. When deer hunting returned to the state in 1943, 4 years later, we were harvesting it. We had antlerless deer as a menu item, right? I mean, you could harvest antlerless deer 4 years after deer hunting returned to the state in 1943. So Ohio hunters have always been there and always been interested and always been willing to shoot an antlerless deer. And many times those were the most abundant deer. We were protecting antlerless deer to regrow our deer population, and we were harvesting the heck out of bucks. So we had a rather warped sex ratio. So antlerless deer were always available. Hunters would willingly step up and say, yeah, I'll be glad to harvest an antlerless deer. Give me the permit. So we were very, very blessed in that way. But fast forward to 2024, 2025, Sean, I don't know that I can necessarily say that. I mean, I have some doubts about our ability to effectively manage Ohio's deer herd moving forward. I see what we're offering hunters. We've made the antlerless permit. It went from being valid in 14 counties to being valid statewide, to being valid for only part of the season, to being valid through the gun season. And I look at the proportion of the harvest that's antlerless, and I'm not encouraged. Plain and simple, I'm not encouraged. We have to talk about the future. We've got to talk about where this deer herd is heading, and more importantly, where our hunting population is headed. This is no fault of anyone's. No fault of anyone. This is demographics. This is land being lost to leases. This is land being lost to development. This is land being lost to a variety of reasons. And hunters find aging out, right? I'm 62 years old. I am the epitome of the deer hunter in Ohio. I mean, the baby boomers, that generation is aging out. And when it's gone, it's going to be like going over a cliff in terms of deer numbers, right? Deer hunter numbers. We're not backfilling. There's a few states in the country that seem to be holding their own. Missouri comes to mind immediately. But we have to talk about options for the future more than what we are right now. Otherwise, the simple math says you're not shooting enough antlerless deer. Hunter success rates are near 50%. Hunter satisfaction metrics are through the roof. And everyone is killing everybody that it seems that wants a mature buck. We're killing record numbers of mature bucks. That doesn't add up to. That's great for right now. These are the good old days, if you will. That's how I would describe it. These are the good old days. We are living the good old days, but we have to be mindful of what cost it's going to impose on us if we don't also address the future. We've got to be thinking down the road rather than just enjoying what we're doing right now.
Yeah. So I guess let me see if I can kind of maybe touch on one thing. And there's a lot of matrix that is going to go into this, but one of the reasons why antlerless deer harvest is important is there's only so many resources for a whitetail herd, as a general, right, in a region, in an area. Let's take Mill Creek Park for an example. they got overran by deer, and it got to the point where they actually opened hunting into the park. This is why it's important, because the reason they opened it up is because the habitat of the park was starting to suffer because of the overpopulation of the deer. Not only is it the habitat of the park, but it's also going to be the overall health of the herd general, because the more mouse that are on the landscape, the more resources that landscape has to be able to produce to be able to support that many mouths. And that's great if you want to hunt bucks. And I'm with you. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I'm just throwing out my ideas of this, right? And my observations and my opinions. It's great if you want to be a buck hunter and that's all you want to do. I know some people in my close circle that absolutely will not shoot a doe. They don't believe in it. They will not do it. And some of them are also older hunters, so they might be coming from a different time period of hunting in Ohio. Now, with that said, that's great if you want to harvest bucks all the time. I get that, but you're allowed one buck in the state, and I'm not advocating for more than one buck in the state. No way, shape, or form am I advocating for that. The point I'm trying to make is that one buck, right? One buck is able to probably inseminate multiple does during a rutting period, right? Starting from October through as late as in. I will say there are probably some does that are still being bred sometime in January, and you would probably know more of this than I do, but I would probably say it probably goes on into January, based upon some of the younger fawns I see in October who are still on spots late in October, which means they were a late bred doe.
Many of our fawns are being bred right now. Or were, a month ago, I should say. I guess it is March.
It is March.
Seems like January today.
And but with that said, like it's not helping the population, because that one, a handful of bucks is able to go through and probably inseminate a large part of the doe population to continue on the lineage and continue that population on. And depending upon the age class of the deer, you might have ones that just have one fawn, but as they get older, they have the ability to produce multiple fawns in one cycle. So it's just starting to multiply the issue if we're not taking some of those mouse off the landscape. Is that kind of in the ballpark, or am I way off there?
Oh yeah, that sums it up. That sums it up perfectly, Sean. And to your point, I have friends as well that refuse to harvest a doe. That's just the time they want to spend in the woods. They want to shoot a mature buck, and I don't have a problem with that.
Mm-mm.
But I think again, remember, I'm pretty low on the totem pole here, but if I were king for the day, I think what's fair is that if you're unwilling to harvest an antlerless deer, then you should pay more for that opportunity to harvest a buck, right? And that would help. That money could be used to help somewhere else, right? So I think there's solutions, because I get it, right? I mean, it's just, you don't want to bother with it, but then it's going to come with a price tag, right? You got to pay more for that opportunity to harvest a buck. I mean, there are a multitude of things, Sean, that we can think about in regulation changes, but I think, as I told, and I don't know how well received it was, but I was telling a group of colleagues 2 weeks ago at the Southeast Deer Study Group meeting, the folks in New England are approaching a place that many of us in the Midwest were, probably 5, 6, maybe even 10 years ago. Historically, folks from New England would come to Ohio and the Midwest to kill deer, simply because there were so few deer in many parts of New England, because they're just less productive habitats up there. But they're dealing with overabundant deer in many parts of the New England states, and of course the Southeast is covered up with deer. So they invited us to participate in a discussion about, I guess it was a brainstorming session. They were going over some data, some tools, whether it's earn a buck or it's this or it's that, and I told them, I tried to make it as polite as I could, but I said, you're wasting your time. But I don't know how well that came across, because the reality is, the answer is not in harvest regulations. We talked about this already. We talked about bag limits. There is a finite number of deer that hunters are going to kill under the current, assuming we don't tell them, if we don't tell them the story that you and I are having right now, the conversation, if they're not privy to this conversation, if they had no idea that this is the situation that we're in, if we don't have that conversation, there isn't a harvest regulation out there that is going to significantly affect the harvest. I would stake at least tomorrow's lunch on that, right? So the solution doesn't lie in harvest regulations. It lies in education. It lies in conversation. It lies in storytelling. Until we do more of that, folks that are trying these, let's add 2 days at the end of the season, or let's start a season in August, or we don't need more days. We don't need more opportunity. The hunters are not short on the average hunter in Ohio. How many days a year do you think the average hunter hunts? Now, I don't know we don't know how many hours this day represents, but what do you think the average Ohio hunter hunts? And if you've been looking at publication 5304, you can't answer it.
I have been looking at some of the publications. I have not seen that number yet. I focus more just the number of deer that's been harvested, but I'm gonna go on a limb and say the average hunter in Ohio probably gets about 30 days that they hunt.
Okay, it's about half that.
Okay,
it's about 17 days. Okay, the average hunter identifies that, and now this is from our annual deer hunter survey that we do postseason. So, and the other thing you have to keep in mind, those are probably largely avids, right? So I'm guessing that 2 weeks is probably a good number, right? Our season is let's call it 120 days long, 125 days long. What would more opportunity do for folks except spread out the limited pressure, the limited number? If you have 50 hunters and you spread them out over 2 days, odds are good that those hunters are going to move deer around. But if you spread those 50 hunters out over the course of 2 months, you're probably not going to have any hunters moving any deer to you, because there's not going to be enough hunters in the woods at any given time. So my point is that we need to talk more about this. And this is where I find these podcasts and so thank you, if we're giving thanks, thank you for doing this, having this conversation with myself and others, to get the word out, because I talked to plenty of people, most recently at the Buckeye Big Buck Club banquet where we got a chance to meet each other. Sean, I had, that was probably one of the most rewarding banquets that I've ever had. Clint and I had an hour, which typically turns into 2 hours, because we start our way out the door and we end up in the hallway and we make it into the banquet room and we're still chattering. But several hunters, lights went on for them. They had no idea we were in these, this was the situation that we were facing. They agreed with me. These are the best of times. Deer hunting has never been better in the state of Ohio. And I'm glad that they're enjoying it. I'm thankful for that. But, all good things have to come to an end, and they're going to if we don't mind if we don't pay attention to what's going on with deer hunter numbers and deer populations. And I beat that horse to death, so I should probably stop.
No, you're right. I've said it before. Ohio is an opportunistic state. Like, there is a ton of opportunity for you to kill a deer in Ohio. The problem that I see, and ODNR and Division of Wildlife is addressing this. So maybe this is a valid problem, is access for a general population to hunt now. Because with the the landowner hunter program or partnership program that Division of Wildlife is running now, is running, was amazing. Which I kind of unofficially patted myself on the back, because I wrote something almost verbatim how it's ran in one of those hunter surveys. I said, you got this app, why don't you do this? And then all of a sudden, like, oh, looky here. I'm being facetious when I say that, but I'm like, I'm gonna go ahead and pat myself on the back on that one, but I know I'm not the reason that happened. But it's a great idea, and I love that. But one of the things I've talked about in a previous podcast with a gentleman down in the southern part of the state, he runs archery hike. His name is Justin. I'm losing his name off the top of my head. But he's mentioned you before. I don't know if he's had a conversation with you or just mentioned you because he's aware of you because of his involvement with farmers and hunters feeding the hungry.
Okay.
Justin Ross is his name. That's it, Ross. And we were having a conversation. I said, it's 6 deer across the state. That's great. But that's only if you have access to public land, because not public, I'm sorry, private land. Let me rephrase that. It's only if you have access to private land to hunt, because on public land, the total number of deer that you can shoot, right, is 2. You're allowed 1 antlerless and then 1 antler deer off of public land. Now, and I'm not advocating really that we need to change that, but the issue is that people are going to have access to public. Man, here I go to private land. You're absolutely correct. We're starting to address that, right? And at least trying to open it up a little bit. But we still have this culture, and I just watched it on another podcast. It's actually one you've been on, where they're basically talking about and blaming states for the management of the deer herd and the hunter satisfaction because they're not managing for trophy bucks, and that they don't want to shoot, the harvest rates or the harvest bag limits and stuff that states are setting are not conducive to harvesting trophy bucks, and that they don't, and they tackled a couple other things too, but basically, and I know these two are very notorious for not wanting to shoot does. I've listened to them multiple times say it before, and that they don't want to deal with them. So there's a few outlets for that, and I don't want to get too far down the weeds, but there seems to be like a cultural thing amongst hunters, especially the ones who remain, that it's about the trophy score of the buck.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to shift the culture. It really is. And it's not something we're going to be able to do just today or tomorrow, but you're right. It's about education. It's about influence, and just moving that needle ever so slightly. If we can be 1% better tomorrow, then we've done something good. And we're not going to get this goal like right now, but the access problem, I think, seems to be one of the biggest issues when it comes to that, because as I said already,
go ahead. That just, Sean, it just directly speaks to the double-edged sword that the amazing resource that we have in Ohio represents, right? You said it once, we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. But having amazing quality opportunities here in the state of Ohio comes with a really, really hefty price tag, and it's called money. People are buying land, they're leasing land, and it's not just out-of-state folks. People in the state are leasing land just as rapidly. Surveys, that is a data set, I will say first and foremost, let's be right up front, it's a difficult data set to get to, because people aren't willing to tell you. Number one, landowners aren't willing to tell you, obviously, that they're involved in leases, right?
Right.
That's wait a second, you're the government and you're asking me if I'm getting money under the table? Sure, I'll answer that, right?
Let me get right on that.
Yeah, let me get right on that. And then of course, on the hunter side of things, we can get maybe a little better data and a little more accurate data. But when you look at things like the folks at what was the QDMA, and I suspect maybe even the folks now at NDA have looked at, is you look at land purchases and the reasons behind these land purchases. People are buying land because they want a place to recreate, and that is, in most cases, that's to hunt. So what used to be a piece of property that would provide 3 or 4 or 5 places for 3 or 4 folks to hunt is now it's now a guy, maybe in his son or family or whatever, it comes in and they may take a deer or two off of that. And I think the other thing is these very nice leases that these farmers are getting. I'm talking to folks. I've got a guy that does, and you may know him actually. He's from your neck of the woods, a retired state patrolman, who's a crop and adjuster. After he retired from the state patrol, he now is involved heavily in crop insurance stuff. And he tells me, time after time, case after case, that he goes out to properties to look at making adjustments because of all the deer damage, and the farmer's like, well, I'm just leasing this land, and the landowner is also leasing the hunting rights, and so there you have a collision. I guess a problem that is going to be very difficult to deal with, because you got the landowner is making he's making money from a sizable lease, hunting rights. He's leasing his hunting rights, and so the damage is probably less of an issue. So it sadly, money is a problem. It's people really are after Ohio's trophy opportunities, residents, non-residents alike, and they're buying and leasing land to the exclusion of other folks that that would, of course, love to have a buck, but also would be willing to shoot antlerless deer. And most of these properties are you can't even shed hunt on some of them. So access is a giant issue, and it's not going to get any better.
No.
It's not, OHAP is a great little program, but it's not the solution.
No.
I mean, it's a start.
So let me ask you this. And if you were king for the day, right? You brought this term up before. What do you think would be, and obviously this is not going to be the fixable, but what do you think is going to be one of the best, how do I want to put this? a best angle to attack the doe population outside of influence. What's that? Communication.
Without hesitation, I will say, if I were king for the day, I would start traveling tomorrow and hit every small town, every gymnasium, every auditorium, every hall that would host us, and we talk to them one-on-one. We sit up on a desk, no presentation, and just lay it out. This is what we've got. That's what's going to make a difference, Sean. But until we do that, I don't think we're not gonna do it by coming up with radical regulation changes that are only going to upset hunters. Because again, I hate to say it, but I have a little experience in the arena. 2007, we rolled out the $15 antlerless permit, right? And it was only valid for the first 8 weeks of the season. Hunters were like, "Wait a second, you knucklehead! You want us to kill more deer, but you're only making this permit valid for the first 8 weeks of the season. We got 8 more weeks we could use it." And I'm like, precisely. We're making it valid only during the first 8 weeks of the season, because if we give you the entire season, you're going to take the entire season. Oh, well, you got me there. So my point is that without a conversation, without context, without, running a survey to say, "Hey, would you support this?" Of course they're going to say no. But if you say, "Hey, would you support this if your mother's life depended upon it?" Oh, well, you should have mentioned that the first time. So yes, I would say that communication. The rest of the story is, who was it? Oh my God, who was the classic radio show host? I'm probably a lot older than you, Sean, so I'm going to date myself here. But who was the guy that said, and now for the rest of the story?
Oh, I've heard tidbits. Anyway, I can't think of it, but yeah, go on.
Anyway, that's my point. Is that there has to be so much more dialogue. There has to be context. If we're going to make changes, we've got to explain it. We need to spend more time communicating with our hunters and our landowners and our general public. I mean, because they have to understand what's going on in the state of Ohio. Hunters provide an incredibly valuable service, right? I mean, we lose hunters, people are going to come unglued because they won't be able to drive, 40 yards without hitting a deer, right? I mean, people need to understand how important hunters and hunting is in the state of Ohio. But I don't think that our hunters are obsessed with antlers and would blatantly and totally disregard the resource if they knew a little bit more about the state of the state, if you will. I mean, again, we're not in crisis mode, but it's unfolding.
Yes.
And I think that's what folks need to know, is that we just need to have a conversation. It's not going to stay like this forever. And in fact, it's going to get worse if we don't have a conversation about what are we going to do to deal with the shortage of hunters. Is commercial venison market the only answer? Is sterilization part of the answer? Is, well, why didn't you tell me? I'd have gladly shot a couple more deer. And one of the things that we haven't talked about, one of the major hubs that we haven't even talked about, is this donation. Okay, we can get hunters to shoot additional deer, but they got no place to donate them because we don't have processors. Because processors, it's a seasonal business that is incredibly difficult to get people in. We're losing them yearly, right?
Yes.
So, I don't want to be gloom and doom, but I want to tell an honest story.
There's a lot of variables that's going against the efforts that you're trying to make. That's part of the end game to all of it. Like you're right. The donation game there, and Justin talked about this. One of the biggest thing that the farmers and hunters feeding the hungry faces is finding processors. They lose them all the time because it's more profitable. And don't let me just paint it with just that one brush. There's more variables in this, but let's just throw down a few. It's more profitable for them to stick to the beef and pig market because, let's be honest, most of them charge you maybe $100, $150 to process a deer. That's not a lot. That's not a lot of money compared to the work that they have to put towards processing that deer, right? There's that.
Right.
The next one is that they have to, and I might be wrong in this, but I'm pretty sure they have to clearly separate those two markets. They cannot have like wild deer meat in nowhere close proximity to the regulated, beef and stuff that's going to be for market, because there's no inspection of that, right? So there's a little bit of a barrier there for them
can,
too.
Sean. I want to make sure I do know a good bit about that. They can. They're, in most facilities, that's not a problem. I just cleared this up with the chief of meat inspection at ODA. The stipulations. You're right. You're right in that they can't be commingled, right? But you can do your deer at the end of the day, right? After you do all your beef and pork and domestic stuff, then you can do your deer in the same facility. But they cannot be done at the same time. You're absolutely right there. So that is a hurdle. But I think the other thing that maybe you were going to get to this, so I'm sorry, is that custom meat, doing custom processing is way more profitable than turning a deer into 1 pound packages of a burger. Way more profitable. So you can't slight these processors for that. I mean, you can't. I mean, there's good answers for why people are doing everything that they're doing. But everybody's going to have to give a little somewhere, right?
Yeah, and that problem actually is going to continue to rise, because as you get less processors, there's less competition for them. I'm not saying that their price is going to rise because of that, but there's going to be less places for commercial farmers to take their beef or their pork to get slaughtered. Right. So that's going to take up more time of the processor. And like, well, if I had to choose between making, and this is hypothetical, if I have to, choose between making $500 per pig or $150 per deer, I think I'm going to select the pig because my time is valuable. That's one of the only resources we don't have unlimited is time. Like, it's a very limited, finite thing we have is time in our day to do something. So yeah, it's a complicated thing, and it's unfortunate. And I personally here, when I killed 4 deer last year, they were all dose. Every single deer I killed, through gun season, through bow season was all dose. Not because I wasn't trying to shoot a buck, but that's just how things worked out for me. Was the 4 dose.
Thank you.
And we eat all of them. I mean, we either I share them with some friends, or the meat, or when I go get trail and stuff done with them. I'll share that stuff as gifts and stuff to kind of help promote the sport things. Little, not to toot my own horn, but just saying these are things that I do. But it's. Let me ask you this, and do you think so? Since we kind of started this program, this what do you guys call it? OLAP? Is that what it is?
OHAP.
Do you think that there could be a spin-off of that, to where maybe they don't want to give up? Like, they might have some hunters that are really big, or they're themselves are really big into bucks themselves, and they don't really want to shoot those, but maybe a connection with some other hunters to come in and give them access to shoot antlerless deer that the state can kind of help promote.
I mean, I hate to be like Johnny on the spot, but no.
Okay.
I kind of mentioned that earlier on. I think as a hunter, you recognize, Sean, that there are places. Gary Comer, our Central Ohio Wildlife Management Supervisor, who does an amazing job, has some property that he would love to get on in Logan County, in his neck of the woods, his neighborhood. But he's got guys there that guide hunts on that property, and they won't even let people on to shed hunt. Or squirrel hunt. I mean, it's just because the potential for disrupting a hunt or running bucks off the property. So no, I don't. I don't know that we could have our cake and eat it too. I don't know that we would have landowners that would be willing to allow hunters to come on and shoot antlerless deer, and not concern themselves with the impact that it would have on buck hunting. If buck hunting it reigns king, so oftentimes. What you end up happening is that if a property is going to be hunted for antlerless deer, it's typically after everybody's killed their buck, where they've decided they're done hunting bucks for the year.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. That's a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just spitballing, and I think everybody could spitball and try to come up with it, but I hate to say it, but I think you got the best solution. That's just going to be communication and influence to get some buy-in from. You're not going to get everybody. There's going to be absolutely everyone who absolutely will not shoot a doe, or they don't want to take the time, or maybe occasionally. I can tell you some of us in our area, I don't think there's been a year that I've not shot less than 3 deer. And, obviously majority of those obviously are antlerless deer, but it's just, but as you look at the statistics, like I fall in along with other hunters like me, we're a very small percentage of the actual successful hunters. The overwhelming large percent is one. And I'm sure you probably know the stat to this, and it just didn't get published, but of that 75%, I bet a good percentage of that was particularly an antlered deer.
Yes. Yep. So if you break it down in that group, I would venture to say that we're probably, I guess I couldn't be wrong if I made the estimate wide enough, but so this year, I think across the board, if we look at the composition of our harvest, I think we were in the 57% or 58% antlerless. If we looked at the people that killed a single deer, the proportion of that harvest that would be antlerless, I should have this on the tip of my tongue, but there's too many. I've run out of room for things on the tip of my tongue. The tongue is full.
Right.
But I would say that instead of 58%, it's probably closer to 45% antlerless, and it's definitely weighted heavy towards bucks.
Yeah. And that's just the culture of hunting. And there's a lot of things that go into that, the commercial market of it and several other things, right? You don't see a brand new bow being sold off the back of a doe. It's always off the antlers of a buck. So just saying.
Yeah.
Anyways. Yeah. Or antlers off of a bull elk or something like that. And it's just, I think that's just who we are as individuals. And, we always strive to be the bigger, better, best. And, right now the bigger, better, best and is, hey, who can shoot the biggest set of antlers? So that's that's kind of what we go for. And I get it. It's, who's going to be who's going to be the king of the tribe.
I really do. Yeah. I understand completely. But I think we got to change some behaviors, or the thing that's going to we'll get to the point where you're only going to be shooting mediocre bucks, or you're only going to be shooting a buck every third year. No one wants to be there, but that's the situation that I think our friends in Wisconsin are going to be facing in some of those counties where prevalence rates are in the low 30s to the high 50s. There's parts of Wisconsin, Iowa County, Wisconsin, parts of that county where every other buck is positive. Every other mature buck that you shoot is positive. No one wants to get to that point. And that's all I'm saying is just, I don't want to be the gloom and doom guy, but there's nothing standing between us and that, except a little bit of time. That's it. Unless we significantly change the way, and I don't know that's even an option. I mean, we don't have 500,000 hunters like we used to, right? I mean, We've got to work with what we've got.
Mm-hmm.
And so even a solution with what we've got, even if everybody steps up to the plate, and decides, hey, you know what, I can ratchet things up. How long are they going to be willing to shoot 2 or 3 deer? Because we make it sound like it's easy peasy, right? If we have donation places, I'll just shoot a couple extra deer. Well, that's a lot of work for a 62-year-old guy
it is.
or gal to drag out of the woods uphill both directions, right?
and 2 feet of snow.
And carrying your brother and all his gear. So, we've just got to start talking about, and it's not human nature, right?
No.
I mean, it's just not human nature to talk about things that are difficult and to plan. We like to enjoy the moment until we can't enjoy the moment, and then we deal with it. I mean, think about it. Just think about it. We nearly lost. It took near extinction of our whitetail deer before we got engaged. Okay, so how do you? I guess that's why I keep reminding myself. I'm like, how do we expect people to get excited about something when we couldn't even? We got deer all over the place. We're killing record numbers of deer, record success rates, record numbers of mature bucks, and we're hopeful that people will get excited about thinking about the future when, in fact, we nearly extirpated our deer. We did from Ohio and lots from many states, right? Before we decided, okay, maybe we better do something. So anyway, maybe pie in the sky, but I have faith in our hunters. I've always said, and I've told my colleagues this, if any of this was ever recorded, that you could go back and find it, that I felt like I worked for one of the best groups of hunters in the country, and I attributed a lot of that to just having, where I could, honest conversations, Division of Wildlife was always open and transparent with our hunters, and told them when we screwed up and told them when we didn't. And I think that's what we've got to focus on, the communication part of things. It's got to be central to our deer management program, or it's going to be even more difficult than it needs to be.
Yeah, one thing I learned from my law enforcement career, which I'm still in somewhat, is that you don't get much compliance when you force people to do something. So you regulate it, you do this, you don't get a lot of compliance into it. Obviously, they're going to follow because, certain things, right? We understand that, but you're going to get way more buy-in, and it may take a little bit longer, but you're going to get way more buy-in through the communication and the influence aspect of it, and just spelling it out there. I heard you talk before, and you said, back as early as the early 1900s, you've seen a deer, then that was like probably you're better off to have seen a Bigfoot at that point in time, because they're darn near not even in the state. And then, through conservation efforts, and obviously now less than 150 years later, we're now asking you to shoot way more deer. And but let me, and we're going to close up here like real soon. I have a couple questions for you. One of them is that, so I'm looking at the harvest rates, or I'm looking at the harvest numbers, and we got like 90,000, and I'm just going to like generalize this, like 90,000 bucks that were harvested, compared to about 120 some thousand antlerless deer, right? And so that number, that ratio number, that's not even a 1 to 2. If you were going to give like the conservationist or the conservationist goal ratio of buck to doe harvest, what would that be? What would you like to see it be?
Well, it's not that simple, Sean. Unfortunately,
I wish it was.
The thing. No, and I get that. That's a great question. That's a great question. And we've done things like this before, and we've actually, Clint and I we've sort of learned this the hard way through the School of Hard Knocks. But our magic, and you can take what I'm telling you, and you can turn it into whatever kind of metric you'd like. But we developed a rule of thumb back in about a decade ago, using the data that we had, using the harvest. So the thing that's changed is hunters are way more selective. We've got a lot fewer hunters, and the hunters that we have are far more selective than they were just a decade ago. But what we found, when there was very, very high demand for deer, any size, any day, we found that if our harvest all deer, across the seasons, if we were at about 60% antlerless, 6 out of 10 deer were antlerless deer. That would be does and button bucks. If we were at about 60%, we would see that the herd would remain relatively stable. That is, it wouldn't increase and it wouldn't decrease, give or take a little bit. Mm-hmm. But if we got significantly lower than 60%, we would see the herd increase, right? And if we got significantly above, if we were in the 65% range, for instance, where we were for several years, and that's what got our population down, we were able to turn the corner on our deer numbers, is that we were able to increase the antlerless proportion to 65, 66%. We could make a significant dent in the population. The other rule of thumb that I'll throw out there, so that worked for a while, and then we realized, because of changes in hunter behavior, because of changes in hunter numbers, that 60% rule probably doesn't hold anymore, because hunters are not shooting the first deer that they see, right? Selectivity is not there. So we not only do we have to talk about the proportion of deer, the composition of the harvest, as you referred to it as how many does per buck kind of thing, but we also have to actually talk about the volume. We have to talk about the absolute numbers of deer that we're removing from the population. And in the old population dynamics classrooms, what we learned early on was that the fall population is roughly a third of the fall population is young of the year. That is fawns that were added to the population, right? So if you want to keep the population stable, you need to remove roughly a third of those deer that are on the landscape. So if you got 100 deer on your property at the start of the season, and somehow you magically knew that, you need to remove about a third of those if you want to keep the population stable. Anything less than that, it's going to grow. Anything more than that, you're going to see a population reduction. But of course, that assumes that you're removing deer, in proportion to their availability. And one final rule of thumb that we used to throw out is that you need to harvest 3/4 if you want a stable population. I think, we used to say you need to shoot half the deer that you have on your property, and 3/4 of those need to be antlerless. That makes a ton of sense and here's why that works. Landowners, we all underestimate the number of deer that we have on our property. Okay, that's a given, right? You always do that. That's a known fact. So if you shoot half the deer you think you have, you probably are shooting about a third of them, and which is where we need to be. Remember, back to our young of the year, a third of the population in the fall is young of the year. So you shoot about half. If you think you're shooting half, you're probably taking a third, and 3/4 of those need to be antlerless, and that gets to the composition of the standing crop. What the herd actually looks like on the landscape. So it's really at the end of the day, what I would say, to listeners is that we need to move from 1.3 to something on the order of 1.6 or 1.7. But again, we're not going to get there until we say, hey, kill more deer. That's not going to get us there. We're going to have, a long conversation like you and I just had, but hopefully not one-on-one, because I think I'd run out of time.
Yeah. So let me just kind of summarize what I'm hearing out of this, and you can feel free to correct anything that I say. While it may not appear to be an issue right now, right? However, for us to be able to maintain the quality of the herd that we have, right, and to hopefully get ahead of some of the issues that may be coming, that will come with a exploding population, is that we need to address what the actual population of deer is. And the best way to address the population of deer is to remove a fair amount of the antlerless deer from the herd per season. Because as we talked earlier, the not just diseases itself, but the disease, anything like that needs deer to be present, and not just present, but also a high prevalence or a high presence rate of them, like a high rate of deer in that area, population rate. So by reducing a smart reduction, right? We're not talking eradication. We're talking a smart reduction of the deer population through proper conservation and management efforts. We are, in the end, for long-term goal, promoting a healthier, more productive herd. Is that kind of, or am I way off?
No, that's actually spot on. And the other thing, of course, we can't forget the antlers, but that there's a clear connection between herd quality, herd health, and antler size. There's absolutely, we know that for a fact, right?
Yes.
We actually have data from Ohio back, as far as the 70s. We were collecting this data. You can look at the relationship between yearling antler beam diameter and the proportion of fawns that are breeding, or pregnancy rates. Any of those productivity metrics will tie very nicely to antler size. Buck's ability to grow what the size of its first set of antlers. And so yes, if we can't reach you through through other metrics or other means, such as it's going to mean fewer deer car crashes, it's going to mean less crop damage, it's going to mean fewer tick-borne illnesses and fewer cases of alpha-gal and less conflict in the garden, and you can grow hostas again. If we can't reach you there, then understand that if we keep putting more and more deer on the landscape, antler quality is going to suffer, and it already is. I mean, it's to the untrained eye, you're not seeing it. No one sees it. But since I started in 1995, we have seen continual erosion of yearling antler beam diameter in Southeast Ohio, and we're seeing that now in the western part of the state. So it's happening, but like CWD, and climate change, it's moving slow enough that the untrained eye will not see it. You go to the Buckeye Big Buck Club banquet, Sean, and the folks are like, that guy's wacky. What's he talking about? Things are great. No. In 1980, 1% of the annual buck harvest was going into the Buckeye Big Buck Club. Today, it's a fraction of 1%. Okay. But we have a lot more deer on the landscape. So folks thinks life's great. If you get a chance, I don't know if it's on our website. I think it is, but you should check out closer look at deer herd condition, quality versus quantity. I forget exactly how we titled it, but it's a great publication that I was hoping would get some traction with folks because it looked specifically at antler quality over time and antler and entries into the Buckeye Big Buck Club, which is something that people can get their head wrapped around. And on the surface, it looks like we don't know what we're talking about because Buckeye Big Buck Club entries have been going up, but they haven't been keeping pace with the number of bucks that have been harvested. You follow me?
Yes.
Because they need to get, instead of getting to 2.5 or 3.5, they need to get to 4.5 and 5.5 in many parts of the state now because deer numbers are so high and habitat quality has degraded because our forests are maturing.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I'm glad you brought that up because like you said, to the person looking at just this very small fraction, like the one who's actually just looking at the tree, they're like, this is healthy, but they're too close to the tree to actually see the forest as a whole. And so you're coming up with like, this is the forest numbers, right? This is, when I say forest number, this is the grand scale number. We're not talking about what you see in your small little microdome, right? This is what the grand scheme is. And and correct me if I'm wrong. And another thing, like, because antler growth, any deer is going to spend most of its resources on the retention and of its body, right? Or the maintenance of its body. Antler growth is a side thing, right? Yeah, there's some other things that play into that, but if it doesn't have an abundance of resources to promote to its antler growth, it has to take care of its body first, right? You has to take care of you has to take care of the maintenance of its muscles, its heart, its gut, all of its energy sources, right? And the antlers is probably one of the last things it worries about. When I make it sound like it's an intelligent thing, but it's just how the body works, right? That's the last thing. So you could have a deer that's got great genetics for antler growth, but if its resources are not good, like it's going to have to devote more of its resources to just the development of its body, and it might not actually reach its true potential. And for that to happen, there has to be an abundance of resources for that deer. Now, of course, in micro cases, a lot of people are food plotting. A lot of people bought into this QDMA where they're food plotting. They are supplemental feeding. All these things that go into this that might help in that general thing, but as a grand scale thing, the larger deer herd gets, the less resources there are, and the less quality of deer you're going to have. Period. Right? All right. So one last question for you, and then I'll give you a chance to kind of close this out. Any last comments you have, and this came from one of the listeners, and they asked, and it sounds like we've already answered this question, but I just want to make sure we specifically touch on it. Obviously, Ohio has transitioned. We've gotten a little bit more technologically advanced in how we handle our deer harvest or our deer reporting. So the question is that have you seen a significant either increase, decrease, or any significant impact to the deer herd since we've gone from going to a check station where you got the metal tags to now going to the e-check?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's one that that we answered a lot. More like a decade ago. I think folks have moved off of that topic, but yeah, Sean, we looked closely. We monitored the harvest, saw no declines in harvest when we moved to telecheck, and I guess I would I live, eat, breathe, sleep this stuff, so it makes sense that this seems a bit more obvious to me, but. I don't know that the metal tag was that check station was a compelling reason for people to not cheat. Right. I think you mentioned it early on from a law enforcement standpoint. Most people want to abide by the law, right? I mean, sometimes you step outside the law because of circumstances beyond your control or whatever. But by and large, I don't think. I mean, what it suggests is that we had a bunch of cheaters that we had reined in with metal tags, and once we took away metal tags and in-person checking, everybody was back to cheating, or was able to realize their potential as cheaters. And I don't believe I work for a group of folks like that, not for a second. And so I would say no, that's not been a concern of ours. Is the I'm sure it happens, absolutely, 100% positive. Our wildlife officers are making cases every single year. I'm sure that's happening, but we looked at the harvest. Of course, we need to do better than just say, hey, Mike Tonkovich said he didn't think it was an issue. We actually were able to look at the harvest and watch for, do our best to control for other factors that might have impacted the harvest. But after we rolled telecheck out in 2011, we didn't see any major deviations in harvest, not at the county scale, not at the statewide level for sure. Anything that you would expect, because of the opportunity to not bring your deer to the check station. In other words, there wasn't a dramatic drop off in the harvest. I didn't expect it, and we didn't see it.
And that's a good answer. I think, but like we've covered that pretty well. Not necessarily that exact question, but we've already said that the population is exploding, and it is. And here's some metrics that we've actually developed. And although the population number is exploding, it also the quality is starting to decline. Now, like you said, it's a snail's pace kind of. So we don't see that because it's just moving so slow. The needle's moving so slow that it goes unrecognized until it gets to a certain point where it's like, hey, wait a minute. But by then it's already so far gone on the other side of that. So now I think we covered that one pretty well, just not directly. I just wanted to make sure that I didn't leave this guy hanging. He could be mad at me or something for not answering.
Yeah. And to his point, and this is, again, I sound like I'm getting back on my soapbox, but I would say that if anything, it would be increasing with an increasing deer density, right? I mean, yes. Because I feel like folks are. See, there was a time, this is again back on the sociological side of things and, and the behavioral side of things and values and beliefs. I think where folks really thought about whitetail deer differently than they do today. Many of them just because of their sheer abundance, let's just think about it. Again, simple economics. When something is in large supply, its value goes down. When it's in short supply, its value goes up, right?
Correct.
All else being equal, that's what's going to happen. So deer have become, I think in many circles, have become devalued. And I can think of a case in Noble County. A guy, wildlife officer was telling me, or someone was telling me about, I know where, maybe it was at the banquet. Yeah, that's where it was. It was actually at the banquet. Case in point, judges can decide what the county judges have the authority to decide what the restitution value is going to be for a buck. We set the guidelines, but it's the county judges. And this guy had asked me about, this guy killed a Boone and Crockett buck and it was charged $500. And I said, well, Tom, I bet you money the judge is probably up to his eyelids in deer and has a tough time understanding how we can expect someone to pay $30,000 for a buck, for a deer, a single deer, a deer that I can't, that I'm dodging on the highway and that I can't grow a garden because of these deer. So I guess the point of all of that is that I think as deer numbers go up, again, this double-edged sword, as deer numbers go up, they become devalued. And especially when we offer excessive bag limits and all these things. Hey, kill a doe, but you can still only kill one buck. And if you kill it illegally, it could cost you $40,000, right? What does that say about the does, right? I mean, what does that say about the devaluation, component there? So we've got to. I'm surprised it's taking me this long to use this word balance or tightrope, walk a tightrope, but it's all about balance because we want to kill additional antlerless deer, but at the same time we don't want folks to think, that they're trash deer, right? That right. We need to get to the point where, if we can ever get back there, where people really value, the whitetail deer the way they used to, and that may be unrealistic, because of sheer numbers. But anyway, that's kind of a long-winded answer to. Number one, we didn't see it right out of the gate, but if I were a betting man, I would say that it's probably increased over the years simply because folks, they may look at things, like they're doing us a favor by taking the deer off the landscape, and so they may change their view. But by and large, I'd say I work for a rock solid group of hunters and would not expect that to be a problem.
Well, Mike, Tonk, if that's okay if I call you Tonk, I don't think I could have said it better myself. So the last few minutes that we have together, is there anything else in closing you'd like to say that we haven't touched on, or just you want to reiterate something that you think is important?
No, Sean, as I said, I'll just sum up and say some of the things I've already said like 14 times. Firstly, I appreciate you having me on today. It's a great opportunity to reach lots of folks. And so thank you for that. Number two, I painted a somewhat bleak picture only because I really care. And I think most hunters care about the resource. It's a factual picture. It's a story that needs to be told. And so I think that my intent today was not to, be difficult or be a naysayer or rain on anybody's parade, but to look out for the future so that your kids and your grandkids have the great opportunities that we're enjoying right now. And it's not an insurmountable task. I think with communication and storytelling and more communication and more storytelling, get into the weeds. And I know that's hard. I know it's really hard because it takes a lot of time, and getting hunters together to talk about this stuff is really difficult. Even when you offer an incentive, it's hard to get people to come out and spend a Saturday morning talking to the Division of Wildlife or listening to the Division of Wildlife. But we're here, and we're going to continue to be here, and we will continue to do our best to spread the word when we get the opportunity. But thanks again for having me on. I really don't have a whole lot more to say.
If people want to be more informed or get more informed on these topics that we talked about today, where can they go?
740-589-9922 is my phone number. Or you can email me, or Clint McCoy, John McCoy. It's actually john.mccoy and michael.tonkovich at dnr.ohio.gov. We'd be happy to start that conversation there.
Awesome. Well, Mike, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us on the podcast. You are a very busy man, and I cannot thank you enough for doing that and speaking with us for the last about almost 2 hours now. Ladies and gentlemen,
my job.
He's like, it's my job. Well, and once again, I know you're thanking me, but I thank you. I appreciate this so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you guys for taking the time out of your day to sit and listen to this podcast as we discuss the deer population here in Ohio with the deer program administrator, Mike Tonkovich. And I think we touched on a lot of important things that I think we as hunters and conservationists need to start to address and realize where we are. And there's no one size fit all answer to anything that we discuss. But I agree with Tonk that we have to start having these conversations and get the communication out, because it's not about what we see today, but it's about what we're going to see tomorrow. And it's what can we do that's going to move that needle just that 1% a day, because we're not going to change the culture overnight. It's not going to happen. There's going to be too much resistance, too much resilience to it. It's not going to happen. But we need to move that culture a little bit day by day so we can enjoy the pursuit of the white-tailed deer here in Ohio for many generations to come. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I know that your time is very important. And like I said earlier, I do appreciate that you spent the last 2 hours with us. We do not take that lightly, but I do ask that before you guys leave, please take a moment to rate the show on the podcast platform of your choice and also leave us a review. If you would like to, you can also follow us on our social media accounts at Country Fried Outdoors on the Instagram and Country Fried Outdoor Productions on the YouTube. And also we're now on TikTok. I tried my best to stay out of that for as long as I could, but we're now on TikTok. So check us out, countryfried.outdoors on TikTok. But I think it's time for us to go ahead and close this thing out. So ladies and gentlemen, as you are out there chasing the experience that you want, may you have the courage to fail, but yet have the humility to learn. And until our experiences cross paths again, we hope you stay safe out there. And as always, God bless you. Thank you for listening to the Country Fried Outdoors Chasing Your Experience podcast. Before you go, don't forget to leave us a review and follow the show on the podcast platform of your choice. Are you hungry for more Country Fried Outdoors? Then follow us on Instagram at Country Fried Outdoors, or subscribe to our YouTube channel at Country Fried Outdoor Productions.